You're supposed to play your strongest monsters, not your cutest ones, Taya.
I assume that means your soldier guy's gonna fight my little flying guy?
Mm-hmm. But trust me, Taya, there's a lot more to this board game than just battling monsters. The main goal is to capture your opponent's symbol game piece.
Hi everyone, I know I said Subterra would be coming next, but I heard about the ban list and Duloran is now at 3, and also I happened to get my hands on 3 copies of this Freezing Chains structure deck. So here's a 3x Freezing Chains Ice Barrier deck profile. This deck is not the worst, because if you look at some of the older decks like Fire Fist before the new support, Fire Fist had some trouble even putting one extra deck monster on the field in one turn sometimes. Or another synchro based deck, Yang Zing really only had one card that could allow you to go into a synchro the first turn. At least with Ice Barrier, there's a decent number of play extenders. Also the card Surface. With these cards you can hope to go into 2 synchros on your first turn of the duel, even with some extra traps set too. So I took a couple minor liberties building this deck, but generally the deck is where I want it to be. I think it's a solid build given the cards that were in the structure deck. So 3x Revealer. This is the best normal summon in the deck. Allows you to discard a card and then special summon an Ice Barrier tuner from the deck. So you can go into Hexa, the level 1, which can then manipulate its own level and also send another tuner to the graveyard. If you have a General Wayne or Silent Angler in hand, you can special summon again. Then you might be able to use Surface to bring back that higher level tuner that you sent to the grave. At the end, you may have enough materials for 2 synchros. And that's generally the point of the deck, is to summon as many extra deck monsters as possible, seeing that they're the strongest monsters. Furthermore, this card replaces any card you would discard for cards like Bryanak or Gungnir. This card also stops your opponent from tribute summoning, which would hinder really only True Draco, because unfortunately it doesn't stop tributing in general like Mask of Restrict does. But also notice that this particular copy here is misprinted. 3 copies of Speaker. So a level 4 body that you can put onto the field easily for synchro material, and in the graveyard creates a level 1 token also for material. In a deck that focuses on just putting as many monsters on the field for extra deck materials as possible, you just need cards that are or create just bodies on the field. 3x Hexa. So I ran 3 of this card because, for one thing, you need more tuners in the deck if the whole deck is extra deck is comprised of synchro monsters. But also, this isn't a bad normal summon if this is in your hand, because it can send Speaker or Dwayne to the graveyard, which both have graveyard effects. 3x General Wayne. So the thing about this deck, even though there are no hand traps, you still probably want to go second in my opinion. All of the extra deck cards, besides Duloran and somewhat Trishula, have the effect of removing cards that your opponent controls on the field. So it defeats the purpose almost to summon cards like Bryanak, which don't have protection and can be removed easily, even when your opponent doesn't have cards to bounce. So General Wayne, it does need your opponent to have a monster on the field to summon this card, so it's better to go second in terms of this card specifically, but it is a higher level card that you can put onto the field easily for materials. It does search Medallion or Freezing Chains. Freezing Chains also specials from the graveyard, so it just helps you keep going with your plays. This card also has a decent continuous effect of banishing spells and traps that would leave your opponent's field and normally go to the graveyard, which would hurt a deck like Salamangreat. 2x Silent Angler. So this is another extender from the hand, but just be sure that you special summon Speaker before going into this card, because it stops you from specialing from the hand for the rest of the turn. But just like I said, more materials on the field is better. 2x Dwayne. So this card is unfortunately not a tuner, which is a big bummer. It doesn't add to the total number of levels you have on the field. It just gives you 1 more material, because the original monster will be reduced by 2 and this will be on the field. So no net gain, no net loss. If it were a tuner, it would be a lot more useful, but it special summons itself from the graveyard in case you do need one more monster to go into a card like Trishula or Trishula Zero Dragon, which do require multiple non-tuner monsters. This card is also the way you can go into General Raiho or another high-level Ice Barrier monster that I do run when you tribute summon this, or tribute this card to summon from the hand. Cryomancer, Defender of the Ice Barrier. The tuners, both of these cards have mediocre effects, but they are still higher level tuners and of various levels, which you need in the deck for synchro summoning. And especially this level 3 here is useful because it is the only level 3 in the deck, the way I have it here, to send to the graveyard with Hexa, Medium, and General Raiho. So I decided to include this card Medium because not only does it have an okay Floodgate effect, but it does have its own way to special summon itself, so it won't necessarily be a bricky high-level monster, especially if you're going second. General Raiho needs to be special off of Dwayne Jean, unless you do want to tribute summon it, but its effect is the best way among these main deck monsters to actually mess with your opponent. So I put it in here at 1 because it can be searched with Medallion as well. This card, it's not a once per turn, so it will make your opponent discard every time their effect resolves, unless they just don't want to have the effect resolve with effect. So unless your opponent is using a deck which benefits by putting cards in the graveyard from the hand, albeit, which is completely possible, your opponent may go negative by even a couple of cards if they do want to have their effects have impact. So 3 times Medallion, straightforward search card. This is a card that you definitely want to be playing at 3. 3 times Freezing Chains. So this card is most useful for bringing back a level 4 or lower monster from the graveyard. But like I may have said, alongside Surface, it can actually, this card alongside Surface can help you go into a second synchro. It's just a really useful extender sometimes. The second effect is hard to have active because oftentimes you will consolidate your materials into less than 3 synchros at the end of the turn, but this is still one of these cards that you probably do want to be playing at 3 here. So 2 times Winds over the Ice Barrier. This card is kind of underpowered and makes me think that Freezing Chains or Medallion should have been one of the ultra rare spells instead of this card. It doesn't plus you, and it just reconfigures your total levels on the field. It's still useful for a deck that does actually need specific and exact combinations of levels. This card can also put Revealer or Hexa on the field, which can keep the play going that turn, but I think this card, honestly, it very well might brick at 3, even at 2 it might brick. 2 times Surface. Although there aren't too many low-level fish, Sea Serpent, or Aquas in the deck, all of the tuners do fall under those categories and are coincidentally the ones that you want to be reviving anyway. This card is important in the deck if you want to go into multiple extra deck monsters. 1 times Mirror, so you could add more copies of any of the traps really if you don't want to run this card, but it has the potential to banish several cards owned by your opponent in various places in 1 turn. So if you're playing against a deck like Subterror, you could chain this card to the effect of Umastrix when they try to banish one of your monsters, and you can hit them right back. 1 time Salvage for the last spell. This card recurs from the graveyard many monsters in this deck, but it may break if you bump it up. So 3 times Fiendish Chain for the traps. I realize that Fiendish Chain isn't the optimal card to run nowadays, but considering what's in this structure deck, this is still one of the better options to have in the deck. I think it's still a decent idea to run at 3 for interruption. 2 times Heavy Storm Duster. Many older decks do rely on back row, and yes, newer decks like Drytron or Sky Striker do have back row as well, but honestly, it's going to be hard to beat those decks, those kinds of decks, with something like Ice Barrier. A Pointer of the Red Lotus. So I actually didn't own a copy of this card before I bought this structure deck, so good to have one now. But this card is played in Altergeist frequently. Generally a good trap to mess with your opponent's hand, similar to Light Force Sword. 1 times Crackdown. So it is kind of risky to run this card when your entire extra deck consists of synchros and not links, but because you could steal a link monster or an XYZ monster or just the wrong level monster. But even if you can't steal a monster that helps your synchro summoning, this card is still a decent card for just interrupting your opponent more generally and stop your opponent from using their own materials. Last card in the main deck is a Terror of Trishula. Oftentimes I found with this deck that you need as many play extenders in your hand as possible. So this card, really similarly to all the traps here, are subject to being discarded by cards like revealer, so you can actually save the other cards in your hand to build up your board. The thing is that against an opponent using even a somewhat competent deck, it's going to be hard to use all of the effects of Terror of Trishula, but I think it's fine at 1 still, because for that reason you're not going to control as many synchros as you want to use all of the effects. And also it's not as generic and constantly applicable as Fiendish Chain. I think 1 is fine. It does belong in the deck, but 1 is fine. So for the extra deck, so 3 times Duloran. Unless I have something wrong, this is a somewhat useless card in this deck, given the other cards you were given in the structure deck. Fiendish Chain and Crackdown don't work anymore if they leave the field, so you could supposedly want to get those cards back to your hand, or just any card that you control back to your hand to be discarded for cards like Bryonac, but at least in the context of this deck, this card is kind of underpowered. 3 times Bryonac. This is in Duel Links, the best level 6 synchro alongside Coral Dragon, which is a slower game than the TCG. Using this card in the TCG, it can be a good kind of form of removal, but it does lose you a lot of cards in your hand, which you probably would have needed. Same thing goes for Gungnir. This is just similar to Bryonac. It destroys instead of bouncing, but you probably will have needed those cards to actually build up your board, and if this card leaves the field after you use its effect, you're going to have nothing in your hand. So 3 Trishulas, 3 Trishula, 0 Dragon. So these are the monsters that you want to make typically, because they are by far the strongest in this structure deck's extra deck. Trishula can be good even on the first turn because it does banish from the hand as well as the field and graveyard, but it is generally a good way to hit all of your opponent's resources at once. 0 Dragon focuses on the field, and like the original Trishula, neither of these cards target. 0 Dragon is often the one you want to leave on the field as well at the end of the turn, because it does have a floater effect to go into the OG Trishula and mess with your opponent's monsters by messing with their attack and their effects. But unfortunately, you won't get the effects of the OG Trishula at this time because it wasn't properly synchro summoned. But that pretty much does it for the 3 times Freezing Chain structure deck profile. This is a decent structure deck all in all, but it's definitely very cool to play a synchro themed deck, not to mention too that some of these cards' artwork is pretty phenomenal. So thanks for watching. See you later.
おいユギ、一人で遊んでばっかいないで、たまにはバスケでもやらないか？
いいよ。僕の入ったチーム負けちゃうから。
それもそうだな。